All right, we're back with Larry for another part of We Are What We Hated. And as he threatened to do the last time we were together, we're going to talk about, well, he's going to talk about a very interesting country that seems to just kind of glide along, doesn't get much on it when anything happens, and that would be Saudi Arabia. To me, that country is still somewhat of a mystery, how it gets away, quote, how it gets away with what it does. So I'll say no more. Larry, thanks for coming back. And am I right or am I wrong? I mean, is there some kind of like favorite status that Saudi Arabia enjoys with the West?
Oh, most definitely. You saw, I think all Americans have seen in the last few years the way that the Bush administration especially would kowtow to the Saudi Arabians. In fact, I remember seeing those disgusting pictures of Bush running around at his ranch, holding hands with the king of Saudi Arabia, and it's one of those make you want to hurl moments, but just the way it is. And speaking of Saudi Arabia, I'll give you a quote, and this is in regards to the Jews and the Holy Land. We shall never call for or accept a negotiated peace. We shall only accept war, jihad, the holy war. We have resolved to drench the lands of Palestine and Arabia with the blood of the infidels, or to accept martyrdom for the glory of Allah. And that's King Abdul ibn Saud, who was the founder of the kingdom of Saudi Arabia. I think a lot of people are under the mistaken impression that all of, the problems with Islam or with Al-Qaeda, and that, most of Islam is peaceful. And there is a peaceful element within Islam. Some of the nations that follow it are not necessarily prone to violence. But here's a quote from an Islamic scholar who his name is Abdul Hussein Zarankou. He is a longtime lecturer at the University of Tehran, and he's also lectured at Columbia University, and somebody who should know for sure what Islam is all about. And he said from the beginning, its spread was accomplished through physical violence, bloodshed, and war. Violence not only against non-Muslim infidels, but also against fellow Muslims. Much of Islam's spread in the world was a result of traders and Sufi missionaries. This is true. Yet the weaponry, scimitars, and sabers, all through the art and symbolism of Islam, makes violence and war a central theme of Islam. Muhammad both taught and practiced violence from the beginning. So here's somebody who is a Muslim scholar, admitting that Islam has this very violent element within it. And just to kind of set up what I'm going to speak about a little bit later, I am going to use the words of our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ, praise His holy name. And this is in Luke 21:24. And they, speaking of the Jews, will fall by the edge of the sword and will be led captives into all the nations, and Jerusalem will be trampled underfoot by the Gentiles until the time of the Gentiles be fulfilled. And Jesus made that prophecy just before his death. He predicted the destruction and dispersion of the nation that would fall upon the generation that rejected him. And this all came true about 37 years later in AD 70 when the Romans came in and destroyed Jerusalem and tore the temple down. Also, in the Old Testament prophet Zechariah said in chapter 12, verses 2 and 3. Now, this is a literal translation from the Hebrew. I was able to come up with a translation that does a better job than the King James Version, although I usually like to use the King James. But he says, "Behold, I am come. I'm going to make Jerusalem a cup that causes intoxication to all the surrounding peoples. And when the siege is against Jerusalem, it will also be against Judah," the Jews. "And it will come out in that day that I will make Jerusalem a burdensome stone for all the peoples. All who attempt to lift it will be severely injured, and all the nations of the earth will be gathered for war because of it. Well, I think you can see there the importance of Jerusalem, and if there's any city in the world that's extremely important in the future and in the present, for that matter, it is Jerusalem, because there is a tremendous fight going on for that city and that area of the world. Somebody might in the audience may be saying, well, what's this got to do with the Nazis? Well, it has quite a bit to do with them, since Saudi Arabia, which is sponsoring most of the world's terrorism, and especially Al-Qaeda, was aligned with the old Third Reich. I'm reading from a book now called America Betrayed by Ron Joseph. Ron Joseph is a doctor, a PhD in neurology, and he wrote a very good book back in, I think around 2002, 2003, called America Betrayed. And he says, the Bush family with its Nazi connections, the Saudi royals with their Nazi connections, and other rich and influential Saudi families were naturally drawn to one another as they share similar ideologies and goals. The New World Order, which is to be governed and controlled by a small ruling class elite, that is, the Brotherhood. In the 1960s and certainly by the 1970s, they were all doing business together. However, in the case of the Saudis, the New World Order will be a worldwide Islamic state governed according to Sunni Wahhabi interpretations of Islam. Although that goal is not shared by the Bush Wall Street corporate elite, the Bush team and the Saudis are nevertheless willing to work together to increase their wealth and power and to combat and eliminate common enemies and competitors for world domination, such as the Soviet Union and its communist allies. In the 1980s, these communist enemies were targeted for elimination, including those in South and Central America, which, despite its distance from the Persian Gulf, is a perfect target for Islamic extremists. Indeed, due in part to Saudi efforts since the 1980s, Islam has become the fastest growing religion among Latinos in the Americas. This is not entirely surprising, as Islam has a long history in Spain, beginning with the Spanish rule of the Muslim Moors from the 700s to the 1400s. It is Spain with its Muslim-colored culture, which conquered Mexico and South America during the 1500s. I have a quote here from a book called Dreamer of the Day, Francis Parker Yockey and the Post-War Fascist International. The quote is from a man named Johann von Leers, who was the second in line in Goebbels' propaganda ministry. And von Leers became immigrated to Egypt to escape prosecution after the Second World War, and he wound up becoming a Muslim there, and was one of the people who influenced the Muslim Brotherhood. And he says in a letter that he wrote to an American Nazi agent, Keith Thompson, one thing is clear: more and more patriot Germans join the great Arab revolution against beastly imperialism. That is good. To hell with Christianity, for in Christianity's name, Germany has been sold to our oppressors. Our place as an oppressed nation under the execrable Western colonialist Bonn government must be on the side of the Arab nationalist revolt against the West. Let Adenauer be furious that honest German patriots are not extradited to him or to his British and American bosses by those freedom-loving Arab countries. May the British swine call us meddlers. In short time, British meddling in the Middle East will be over. That is, as it has finished in Iraq, where the infidel servants of British imperialism are all killed. I, Hamoud al-Allah, the backing given by the USA to the Jewish tyrants in Germany will make the German nation revolt. Indeed, for our nation, there is only one hope: to get rid of Western imperialism by joining the Arab-led anti-imperialist group. Well, this is a pretty loving statement by a man who has switched his allegiance, in a sense, over to Allah and the radical Islamic viewpoint from being just a regular Nazi German.
But now is he supposedly speaking for all of Saudi Arabia? No,
he's just basically speaking for himself, and I guess for that particular viewpoint. He was living in Egypt, and he was obviously involved with radical Islam.
Because it seems...
Get a little... I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I just wanted to follow up with a second question along those lines, and that is, I don't know if this infuriated. I would assume that it did and still does. But to me, Saudi Arabia has always played a very curious game with the West.
Yeah.
And seems to have gotten, and I said it somewhat in quotes a couple of minutes before, and that is that it has this kind of seemingly favored status among the West. And,
right.
And yet, oftentimes, and it depends on whether the media reports are true, that Saudi Arabia gets caught once in a while doing some back alley deals. Mm-hmm. Now, that the royal family has been reported to have been on, close to the edge of the precipice for, like, now we're looking at over a decade. But somehow, some way, they just keep rolling along. And whenever we get upset or track something back to Saudi Arabia, it kind of doesn't go anywhere.
Exactly.
And I guess you're going to do this in time, but are we to assume that groups like the Wahhabis, the Brotherhood, and Al Qaeda, maybe, I don't know, whatever real or false that is, that it seems that they're always pitched against their government for being suck-ups to the West. But again, nothing ever seems to happen. Yeah,
it's all a double game. They are basically in league with the West, or at least with the CIA and certain elements of British intelligence. The whole idea is that it's just another wing of the New World Order, and they have a similar goal, a world conquest with Wahhabism.
I just wanted to share something with you. Just
Sure.
As a backdrop, we know that there's trouble in Yemen now.
Right.
But there's been trouble there for quite some time. It just hasn't made the newspapers and broadcast news. There also is a strange relationship that I call it Qatar. I don't call it Qatar. I just can't do it. It doesn't look like Qatar to me.
It doesn't to me.
I like Qatar. It's got more of a foreign flavor. But now, understand this. There was a listener to the show who was with a PR firm in Chicago. Mm-hmm. And they were doing some work. They had done work with Rand. And they were doing some work with, I guess, some of their I think they have a royal family as well. Some of the people in the family, let's just say.
Yeah, they all do in those countries over there.
And they came over. And what the individual told me is that he was surprised at how, bullish they all were on their relationship with the United States. I believe around the early part of the last decade, the United States built something there in what they call Education City. Mm-hmm. Also, that was one of the countries that we landed armament for the Iraqi intrigue. In fact, somebody made a comment that they were landing so many tanks and trucks and such. They said they were surprised that the land didn't sink into the Gulf. So, there's another one, and they also made this claim. Now, this might have been their mouthing off, and not necessarily what the country wanted. I don't know, because it didn't seem to come to pass. But they promised, and they were boasting at that firm, that they were more oil-rich than Saudi Arabia, and would make Saudi Arabia look like, a second-rate country. Now, I'm just throwing that out there.
I think that'd be a little tough to do, but, it's I don't know. Yeah. It's possible.
No, it sounded...
I'm not a geologist. I couldn't tell you.
Well, and I'm also wondering if they're talking about per square mile. I don't know.
Yeah.
Again, this is second or third hand.
I recently read that the palace of the king of Saudi Arabia, and I can't figure that whole royal family out. There's so many of them, but the royal palace, as I understand it, is worth $17 billion. And I've seen pictures of it, and it's just, it's beyond, belief. I've never seen that kind of luxury and wealth displayed.
I'm wondering whether the United States hasn't hedged its bets by sidling up to Qatar, Yemen, and some of the other, smaller countries on the Saudi Arabian Peninsula. Mm-hmm. I'm just wondering if they're doing that And that's their way of saying to Saudi Arabia, look, we know you're a little sleazy too, so we're just going to head and create a little insurance package for ourselves. So I just, and it's going on right now too, Larry. Now it's being mentioned that NATO and the United States, are bombing and having something to do with that. But a lot of the folks who were aware of it, like Jeff Long down in D.C., he's the guy that got a job description sent to him about basically doing IT for the military in the Horn of the Cape.
Oh, yeah.
And I'm like, this is too interesting, and again, you never heard much about it, but I guess now it's going to come out in the open. So, this whole thing continues to go on. And it's like spy versus spy versus spy. And let me just ask you this. On a scale of 0 to 2, exactly how trustworthy do you think Saudi Arabia is?
0.
Yeah, I know.
They would obviously, cut anyone's throat. The Bush family and other, leading elements of the old-line Nazi financiers, which are the American major players in the NWO, they don't trust them, I'm sure, or, neither. But it's just really, they work together because they're both trying to accomplish the same thing, which is global rule, a fascist state with themselves at the top. And, the Wahhabis, Wahhabism is a horrible, brutal, repressive religion. It's considered to be, by most Muslim scholars outside of it, it is considered to be a heresy. In fact, it's been condemned as a heresy 60 different times over a period of a couple hundred years. And yet, it became, it really became dominant within Saudi Arabia, and the royal family supports it, and they're exporting it, everywhere they can. And it's really the Al-Qaeda, is basically an outgrowth of that, outgrowth of the Muslim Brotherhood. And a great deal of the funding of terrorism in the world today, the majority of it, is coming from Saudi Arabia, and well, I'm sure quite a bit of it's coming from Tehran and Iran too. And you have a split there. That Iran is a Shiite nation, and Saudi Arabia is Sunni Wahhabi. So it's kind of like infighting between them. So it becomes pretty complex. But I do know that the Third Reich and British intelligence, through a traitor named Jack Philby, were instrumental in putting the whole idea of Saudi Arabia on the map. In fact, I got a quote here from good old John Loftus in his book, The Secret War Against the Jews, How Western Espionage Betrayed the Jewish People. And he says, Jack Philby has become an obscure footnote to the history of the Cold War, but his legacy was far from minor. He is one of the lesser-known but most influential persons in the modern history of the Middle East, the renegade British intelligence agent who plucked an obscure terrorist out of the desert and helped to make him the king of Saudi Arabia. Ibn Saud was very much his creation. Philby stole the information from British intelligence files that engineered Saudi control over the holiest shrines of the Muslim world. Jack Philby and Ibn Saud betrayed the British Empire and made the American oil companies economic masters of the region. The man who helped them do it was Alan Dulles, drum roll please, an American spy who had befriended while he was coordinating American intelligence gathering in the Middle East in the first half of the 1920s. Between them, these three men built the very foundations of the modern Middle East. They were the architects of the oil weapon, the instigators of war, the manipulators of history. More important, Philby and Ibn Saud's political and philosophical allegiance was to Nazi Germany, while much of Dulles' profits came from the same sources. So you kind of see there how that it was built up, how it came about, that Saudi Arabia came about. And in the same book that I talked about before, the America Betrayed by Joseph Rahn, he talks about the alliance between Hitler and Ibn Saud. In 1941, after defeating France and conquering Europe, Hitler prepared to attack Russia, while in fact which in fact had been his plan since the 1920s, as detailed in his book Mein Kampf. Hitler wanted living space and oil, and he planned that upon conquering the Soviet Union, that Russia would be divided up into individual states with little governments of their own. One of Hitler's allies in this campaign was the king of Saudi Arabia, Ibn Saud. Ibn Saud was a leader of the Sunni Wahhabi sect of Islam and was the principal Arab leader who had united the Arabian Peninsula early in the 1900s. Hitler was very appreciative of Arab support, but not in a manner that Ibn Saud may have envisioned. Hitler once said, "I'm going to become a religious figure. Soon I'll be the great chief of the Tartars. Already Arabs and Moroccans are mingling my name with their prayers. Among the Tartars, I shall become Khan. The only thing of which I shall be incapable is to share the sheik's mutton with them. I'm a vegetarian, and they must spare me from their meat." He was some kind of egomaniac. In the 1930s, Ibn Saud had his eye on Iraq and the southern states of the Soviet Union, whose populations were predominantly Muslim. Ibn Saud dreamed of spreading Sunni Wahhabi control over this region, thus creating an even greater Islamic state which would be under the domination of the Saud family. Ibn Saud's preferred method of conquest was terror and the sword. Hitler saw eye to eye with Saud. In this struggle, which will decide the fate of the Arabs, I can now speak as a man dedicated to an ideal and a military leader and a soldier. Everyone united in this great struggle who helps to bring about its successful outcome serves the common cause and thus serves the Arab cause. The situation is as follows. We are conducting a great struggle to open the way to the north of the Caucasus. During the struggle, and we don't know when victory will come, but probably not in the far future, we will reach the southern Caucasus. Then I would like to issue a declaration, for then the hour of the liberation of the Arabs will have arrived. Ibn Saud was not only in business with Hitler, but with the Rockefellers and Associates, individuals and corporations which were likewise in business with the Nazi regime. Hitler, the oil companies, the Bush, Harriman, Rockefeller, Dulles, and the Saudi Wahhabi clan of Saudi Arabia joined in the axis of evil. They all had their eyes on the same prize, the Persian Gulf and the Central Asian states in oil. The only way to grab that prize would be war. The Soviet Union would have to be defeated and destroyed, something that Hitler had been promising since writing his book, Mein Kampf. The Nazis wanted oil, world domination, and supported mass extermination and terrorism. Bush and Harriman were in business with the Nazis and supported eugenics and terrorism. Standard Oil wanted oil and funneled money to Himmler's SS and supported terrorism. The Wahhabis, like the Nazis, were seeking world domination through mass conversion to Sunni Wahhabism, and failing that, the mass extermination of those who resist. And all had their eyes on the oil-rich southern Caucasus and Caspian Basin. In the 1930s and 40s, the Nazis would lead the effort to break up and conquer the southern states of the Soviet Union. At the end of the war, thousands of Nazis would be recruited into the CIA and the Republican Party. Decades later, the Nazi-infested CIA would again set out to break up and conquer the oil-rich southern states of the Soviet Union. Like the Nazis, the CIA would employ terrorists and form an alliance with a consortium of oil companies and the Sunni Wahhabi clans of Saudi Arabia in order to achieve this objective. As detailed by Zbigniew Brzezinski, National Security Advisor of the Carter administration, in an interview with weekly French publication Les Nouvelles Observateurs in July 1979, President Jimmy Carter secretly approved CIA efforts which were already underway in Afghanistan to topple the Soviet-backed regime. The purpose of this aid was to draw the Soviets into Afghanistan and to instill civil unrest in the Central Asian oil countries it controlled. It was also in 1979 that Osama bin Laden, who was representing his family company in Istanbul, began working with the CIA to recruit Arab Muslim volunteers for Afghans' resistance against the Red Army. In 1979, Osama bin Laden, the businessman, helped launch the Holy War, which was to topple the Soviet-backed regime in Afghanistan, the key to the Central Asian states, and hopefully strip the oil regions of Central Asia from the grasp of the Soviet Union. Osama bin Laden's family, being in the construction and oil-related business, and the Saudi royal family, all of whom were in business with the Bush family, even in the 1970s, stood to make billions of dollars if Afghanistan and Central Asian states became subject to Western control. According to William Casey, director of the CIA during the Reagan-Bush administration, the principal reason for training and funding the Afghan Mujahideen was to wage terrorism and war against the Soviet Union with Saudi cooperation, and to sow discord in the Soviet Central Asia in order to stir an Islamic revolution and pry these states away from the Soviet sphere of influence. Afghanistan was a key player because Afghanistan provided the only sensible route from the oil fields north of its border to Pakistan and thus the sea. As detailed by Peter Schweitzer, arms were being purchased on the international market with Saudi money, and the CIA was flying them from Dhahran to Islamabad. The CIA was also flying in weapons and ammunition. 10,000 tons of arms and ammunition were going through the channel every year. However, that this was done through the Wahhabi clan was top secret. The Wahhabi clan being the bin Ladens and the royal Saudi royal family. The Saudis were happy to play a major role. Saudi Arabia's King Saud and other prominent Saudi families belonged to the Wahhabi clan. Like King Ibn Saud from decades before, they wished to extend their rule of the Wahhabi Sunni Muslims over Afghanistan, Pakistan, and the oil-rich states of the former Soviet Union in order to create a single Islamic superstate ruled by Muslims subscribing to the Wahhabi branch of Sunni Islam. The Wahhabis, like Hitler, were seeking to establish a Nazi-like New World Order, which would be ruled by an iron fist from Saudi Arabia. Wahhabism, and this is from Stephen Schwartz in a book called The Two Faces of Islam, which is a very good book. Wahhabism exalts and promotes death in every element of its existence. The suicide of its adherents, mass murder as a weapon against civilization, and above all, the suffocation of the mercy embodied in Islam. I think that was pretty long-winded, but I think it gives you a pretty good background on what has been happening in the case of Saudi Arabia with the CIA and Saudi Arabia's connections to what has happened in the former Soviet Union and in Asia, and also shows the connections between the Saudi royal family and Al Qaeda.
Does it strike you strange? I think this is a correct statement. You'll tell me if it isn't. It would seem to me that the United States, above all other nations, is the only one that plays both sides in this, millennia-old, I guess, hatred, you might just come down and call it, between the Jews and Islam.
Yeah.
I mean,
well, the Brits taught us how to do that.
I would. That's very. You know what? Did you ever read anything on Quigley that Quigley wrote about those years when Britain's government and military kind of pushed and carved out the nation-state of Israel in '48?
No, I haven't. I haven't read that in particular. I have read other writers about it.
All right. Well, let me
about that situation. I'm not, extremely well versed, but I've got a general idea of what you're talking about.
All right. Now, just see if this information rings true with anything you came across. Mm-hmm. What I found interesting, and I believe it was in Tragedy and Hope, in which you wrote about this, mm-hmm. and that was there was a time, I guess, and I think there's that movie with Paul Newman. I guess it's Exodus, which kind of covers those years.
Yeah.
Britain pushed for this Israeli state, and then it seemed like they turned on him. And there was a point at which Quigley wrote, and this is not from my memory, and I think I got this remembered correctly because it just stuck with me. There was a point at which they were giving Palestinians arms and giving, the Israelis, crappy equipment. Mm-hmm. It was like they were trying to create some kind of stasis there by tipping the scales whenever anyone was kind of on the short end of things.
Well, I think the end game for the New World Order, if we can call it that, represented by the American wing of it especially, the end game is to, just as in the Pike-Mazzini letter, is to have those two groups wipe each other out, and then take the spoils from that. I think it furthers the aim of the New World Order to have those two opponents wipe each other out. And I don't see there's any way that that's not going to happen, or at least one group will wipe out the other. I think what's being set up is a major war in the Middle East. In fact, I think it may come in two stages. I base that upon my belief in the Bible and Bible prophecies. There's several prophecies about a major war in the Middle East, which would be a confederacy of the nations around Israel. In those days, this was prior to Muslims or Islam even existing, but Psalm 83 and Ezekiel 38 and 39, and of course Daniel. There's even a prophecy about, I believe it's in Zechariah 17, where it talks about Damascus not existing anymore. Well, Damascus is the oldest existing city, continually existing city in the world. But since I do believe in the Bible, I believe that these prophecies will be fulfilled. And strangely enough, they were written anywhere from 2,400 to almost 3,000 years ago. But there's never been a time, I checked it out, a couple of Bible concordances, and there's never been a time at which there's ever been a confederacy of that nature that was ever brought against Israel back in ancient times. So it has to apply to the end times as I see it. And I believe what's being set up is a major war in the Middle East, which would allow eventually a revived Roman Empire to step in, because the two sides would do so much damage to each other. And it may very well be that the United States gets its comeuppance for pushing this. And I really don't see the United States, and I hate to say this, but I don't see us being a prominent player in the future of the world. I do see a beast system, a revived Roman Empire, being the final world empire, just as the Bible said it would be in Daniel.
This is kind of a murky situation, because as much as I don't believe that the nation-state of Israel is the fulfillment of any prophecy, I do believe that Jerusalem is the key. Mm-hmm. Whatever they built around it, whatever nation they wanted to call that surrounded it, I don't really care. But I do believe that it all is about Jerusalem. Mm-hmm.
Jesus said that, and I've never seen anything he said that didn't come true yet.
Yeah, because you do have, like I guess I said this before, but I mean, you do have the tribes being scattered from their lands, and mm-hmm. and they were restored, they were scattered again. Mm-hmm. So that's why I look at the 48 creation of Israel as nothing else but a construct of Satan, who got into the nation-building business after the Lord pulled away, because nobody, and this is my take, okay?
Yeah.
I felt that there's two things, and I said this last night, we did this live show.
Right.
And it seemed to me that two things the Lord got out of, because he's a gentleman, and he wasn't wanted, and that was, they didn't want his divine law anymore to rule the land, and he created nations and asked those peoples to respect the borders of others, and they didn't. So I feel he just stepped back and said, okay, hey, what do you want? Well, we want monarchs. Okay, you got that. And then, of course, you have Satan stepping in and creating a system of mercantilism across the world. And, of course, with that came banking, and blah, blah, blah. What does this all mean? I don't know. The thing is, I know it's going to come down to Jerusalem. I'm going to do something we were going to start last week with Paul Sandin. One of the things I wanted to ask him is to try to put, and again, this is open to some interpretation. You got to be careful. Mm-hmm. And that is, what is it going to be like during the tribulation? Politically, what will we be looking at? I have asked this, and I'll ask this of you. It would seem to me that there will be a satanic ruler, if not Satan himself, whoever he imbues.
Oh yeah.
All right, and he's going to rule from Jerusalem, which is something that I believe will signal Christ coming back, because that's not going to happen. He's not going to allow that to continue, or at least even become something.
No, it will culminate in the Battle of Armageddon. and when Jesus Christ returns. That's what the Bible tells us.
Right,
and yes, there definitely will be a figure that we commonly call the Antichrist, and he will be the emperor of this beast system. He will be just like the old Roman emperor who was worshipped as a god. And this is what Satan wants. And the way the Bible talks about it, as I understand it, he will be indwelled by Satan eventually. This is a human who will be indwelled by Satan.
Yeah, that's what I think, yeah.
And you will have the counterfeit of the Trinity. You will have Satan proclaiming himself as God, the Antichrist functioning as Christ, the Son. And, of course, you'll have the false prophet who will more or less take up the role of the Holy Spirit. And I believe the false prophet, this is just my interpretation, just my opinion, but everything to me points to this great religious ruler being a pope. I mean, I can't see any way around it. We're kind of getting, into a lot of speculation, and there's been an awful lot of books written about this. As far as Israel goes, I'm not really a hardcore Zionist. I've read an awful lot about Zionism that showed that there were good people and bad people involved in that. Who was the guy? Barry Chamish talked an awful lot about some of the just abuses of the original Zionists. And the way I see it is, for whatever reason, the Bible does tell us that Israel would come back together in the end times, and that's obvious. That's an obvious factual reality. And I'm not saying the government of Israel is run by good guys. I don't think it is, but there isn't a government on the face of the earth that is. So, it really doesn't matter much to me there. All I know is that they're going to be beset by their enemies, and I believe that there will be a series of wars. One will be a major war in the Middle East by a confederation of Arab and Muslim nations, and then eventually the war of Ezekiel 38 and 39, the Gog-Magog war, which the Gog-Magog thing may be referring to Russia, and it looks like that it is. It would be Russia along with Iran and several other Arab and Muslim nations in that area. I mean, some of them are named outright. Persia, which is Iran, is named. Ethiopia is named. Of course, the other names are like ancient names of these people, and it's kind of hard to determine who's what. You've also got
Cush.
Yeah. It's really kind of hard to determine, but we know that these are obviously neighboring nations, and I mean, events right now show you, that this is all headed in that direction. You look at Iran right now; they supposedly already have nuclear weapons, which they have purchased from the old Muslim nations that were part of the Soviet Union. They believe that they may already have 2 or 3 nukes. I'm not sure what types or what their delivery system would be, et cetera, but they are building up their military at an alarming rate. They're becoming very powerful in that region of the world, and everybody knows how powerful these countries are, especially with the oil money that they have. And I think it's all building up to this, and I believe that there's going to be a new crusade. I think that Europe will unite behind the Vatican, and we'll have enough of the pressure being put on them, and the actions and behavior of the Muslims in Europe. It's coming down to a clash of civilizations or a clash of powers. You've got in Britain. There's a group called the English Defence League, which has taken as its shield or as its symbol the old Cross of St. George, which was the British, or I should say English, Crusaders' cross. And on it they have a Star of David. So a Union Jack and a Star of David. What they're saying is, the enemy of my enemy is my friend, and the people in this group, to a great extent, used to be, and I guess some of them still are, probably still are, anti-Semitic, but it's the enemy of my enemy is my friend. And these people are starting to obtain money especially from the United States and people in the Tea Party, and that's just one area. Geert Wilders, who is a politician in Holland, has based his campaign. I don't think he's a fascist, but he's based his campaign, and he's becoming more powerful all the time. His campaign is against Islam and the abuses of Islam, and he's become like the third. His party has gone from nothing to becoming the third most powerful party in Holland. In fact, a lot of people are hoping that he will become the prime minister at some point. And it's all over Europe. In France, they're having major problems with the Muslims there. This is going to create, eventually, in my opinion, this is going to create a new crusade. And who's going to step in other than the Vatican? And the Vatican is talking all the time about, I've seen pronouncements from Joey Ratzinger saying, we need to get back to our roots, and we've got to, get back to traditional values and the Mother Church, etc. And I think that's coming.
Well, one of the key things that's interesting is the Vatican's ongoing effort to have full custodialship of Jerusalem. Mm-hmm. They have partial or majority now, and that's something that Chamish was always keeping an eye on, more or less.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that gets really interesting if we talk about this satanic system desiring to rule from Jerusalem. Mm-hmm. Now, Ben-Gurion, in that Look magazine from January, I think it was 18th, 1962, said 25 years ahead. Ben-Gurion's quote, prediction or projection was that Jerusalem would be the capital of the world. Mm-hmm. So that's going on. We have that all shaken and going on. With regard to everything else, I take a look at what was speculated secularly, which is part of the program too. It doesn't have to be all spiritually mounted, mm-hmm. And that was what Mackinder said about a final war having to be fought over the heartland, which is to the north of the Middle East. But so we see this all coming down between the United States, probably Russia and China as the big three, having a war that's going to definitely spill into the Middle East. There's no two ways about it.
Yeah. I think that the Gog-Magog war, which I talk about, which Ezekiel 38 and 39 talks about, I really believe that the people of the north that they talk about it looks like Russia. Now, it may not just be the Caucasian Russians per se. It may be the Muslim population there. It may possibly be that the Muslims have taken over Russia at that point, because there is a considerable population there, and the Muslims are growing, whereas the demographics for the Caucasian Russians, is shrinking.
Well,
so it's kind of hard to say. It may also be Turkey aligned with, someone in that area too. I'm not sure.
Well, remember, when you're talking about Caucasian Russia, you're talking about Slavish, Slavic Russia.
Right.
Now,
I don't know what the proper term, ethnically would be, but I was just kind of,
you're with the Caucasus.
The people that used to,
right.
Be Orthodox Christians, and supposedly some are now, but the old Russian Empire is what I'm talking about.
Old Russia, just as Mother Russia, is back to where it was.
Yeah.
It kicked to the curb those republics that were, for the most part, Turkic or Muslim. Mm-hmm. Wasn't it? We don't hear about this stuff anymore. Who was the one supposed wild man president of one of the republics that was Islamic, or mostly Islamic, and also supposedly had a great deal of nuclear weapons? Was that Azerbaijan?
Yeah. Well, no. Gosh, I wish I knew, Biz. I can't.
Okay, it's
I
all
can't
right.
remember.
But you do remember when there was a big hubbub.
Yeah, I know what
about
you're
that.
talking about.
Yeah, I don't know if it was.
It's one of the stands. You know, I just
Okay,
call them the
okay.
stand. It's Turkmenistan and Kazakhstan and all. It's one of those republics.
But what I was thinking of, and again, this is just my call. I don't know. It would seem possible that those old SSRs that are Turkic or they're Muslim, they're just not Slavic. To me, they're almost lined up like a sandbag, shall I say, like wall between Russia and the action that's going to take place on the other side. I mean, I'm wondering if in this Third World War, and this I'm not using this in a smarmy manner, but it's going to be considered collateral damage, and that's going to be the Arabic people. I got to feel that even if they're not principals in this, they are definitely targeted for destruction, as we are, as you just related. Because
the Bible talks about unless the Lord would intervene, that no flesh would be saved. I mean, we're talking about a war. Okay, look at Israel. You got the situation there. Israel, according to Jane's Weekly, which is probably the most well-informed publication about defense spending and about weaponry in the world. It's a British publication. They say that the Israelis back in the 90s had over 200, this is their estimate, over 200 nuclear weapons. So gosh knows how many they have now. They may have as many as 300 for all I know. But we know they have nuclear weapons. Israel will not say they do or that they don't. That's their official policy, The idea is let their enemies worry about it. They also have short-range and medium-range missiles. They also have one of the best air forces in the world, and they could put, a nuke on one of those planes. They can deliver nuclear weapons onto their enemies in that region. Just no question about it. You've got Saudi Arabia has a tremendous amount of money, and they're trying to beef up their defenses right now. Obviously, Iran and other nations in that area. I should say that there are several nations in that area that are have chemical and biological weapons. So I mean, we're talking an extremely large and extremely horrific war, which would result in tremendous amount of bloodshed and destruction. And I mean, I can't see any way that it's not coming down. I mean, the Jews are not going to run, and the Arabs are not going to let them live there in peace. And it's. I mean, I'm almost 62 years old, and the state of Israel was born a year before I was born, and all my life I've been watching these peace conferences and these attempts at peace, and they never go anywhere.
Yeah, because you're right. They're not supposed to.
No, they're not.
And let's remember, too, that especially in the 20th century, with the part that Britain played in making sure that Palestinian area, state, whatever you want to call it, was going to be a scene of trouble, is when, and we talked about this last night, I mean, with the Balfour Declaration and the McMahon Pledge and the Sykes-Picot Agreement, I mean, it was so nebulous, it just more or less invited Jews to go down there and settle, and that guaranteed problems for however long that happened. And like you said, all attempts at peace either failed or only lasted a short time. And so here we are now in the next century, and this is still going on. So we know it's meant to be, and like I said, it was guaranteed, no matter whether God ordained it or allowed it or whatever. There's certainly a faction that made sure that took place, and here we are again.
Well, I mean, I think the devil is moving things right along. I think he's influencing these events. I think they definitely have a satanic origin. Yeah. And I think you see two intransient groups. The Jews aren't going to give up. They're not going to run. They're not going to leave, and the Arabs are not going to let them just sit there and maintain their presence. I mean, we've been all through it during this series, the extremes of anti-Semitism, Jew hatred that, you know, is way over the top. I mean, really, when you stop and think about it, with all the land and all the money that they have, why would they really even care about, you know, such a small state as Israel? They could take the Palestinians out of there anytime they wanted and settle them into the Arab states, you know, around there, or some of the other Muslim countries, you know. If they're really sincere about, you know, trying to help the Palestinians, they could do that and not have to continue to have, you know, a war of words which breaks out periodically into bloodshed. But they don't want that. I mean, they want the Jews driven back into the sea. I mean, we heard that. You know, I gave you that quote there from Ibn Saud about we shall never negotiate. We would only accept a war, and that's what's going to happen.
Well, but that's on all sides, and they all play their parts. Mm-hmm. And just as you said, it's interesting how there never seems to be a complete pendulum swing of power down there. Mm-hmm. Whatever, and even in this last round of trading fire, or just the Israelis opening fire on would-be settlers, or those who were I guess you could say, exercising a protest. Mm-hmm. Now, you see, then that happens, and then everybody gets upset. But nothing ever shifts anywhere from what seems to be a hopeless deadlock. And it's got to stay in that. It's got to stay in that situation until a certain time. I don't know if it was you and I that talked about. I mean, they could have taken. Did I talk about this with you last time around about how they had Arafat and they didn't take him?
Yeah, we talked about that briefly.
You know, and I'm like, what's that about? So now I look at it in a different way, and it's like, this is what's supposed to happen. You're supposed to stay in this kind of deadlock situation until a certain time. But in the meantime, obviously, everybody's getting all worked up. Now, there's something else that's interesting that's just taken place. Gates went over and ran his mouth, I guess in the UK or whatever, about him not really being that, or the United States not being that happy about NATO's role in what's going on. That the United States has played too much a part in this, quote, coalition, which is, I wonder if it's a coalition at all. So now I'm wondering, are they going to disassemble NATO, or will NATO get an attitude toward us? I mean, there's a lot of geopolitical game of risk that's going on right now.
Right.
And I don't try to predict anything and say, oh, okay, then, you know, World War III will start in such and such a year. We have no idea.
No, there's, you know, the Bible tells you you can't do that.
Now,
it's just like this guy that was going to predict the rapture and people predicting the second coming of Christ. Well, it's in Matthew where it tells you that you can't do that. Only God knows. Only God the Father knows. You know, all we can do is look at the prophecies and realize that they are going to happen, and try to keep our eye on world events and do the best we can to protect ourselves and to prepare ourselves, I should say, for what's going to happen.
Now, one of the things I question is whether or not the part of, three-quarters of, majority of, I don't know, all of it, none of it, if warfare does represent a certain amount of destruction seen in the tribulation. Now, the Collins brothers, in their own mindset, say, oh, no, that would be dominionism. And I understand where they're going with this.
Yeah.
But, I mean, that's not necessarily true. What they think is not what I'm thinking. I'm thinking I don't want any war, and I'm not behind this whole thing. But my point is there could be warfare involved in this, and it doesn't make me dominionist. All right? It's just I'm just wondering how this is all affected. Would it be necessarily something that happens afterwards? I don't know. But I don't think that it has to be exclusive, that the destruction that takes place is all either geological or astronomical or whatever you want to call it, or whether part of it is what we've done to each other. Now, here's the other thing, and I won't go any further with this because I know we've gone far afield, but the other thing I was wondering about, and I want to talk to Sanhu about, and that is how much destruction is left when Christ comes back. Is the earth healed, or do we just work with what we've got? And either way, how badly can Jerusalem be destroyed if Christ is going to come down and sit upon the throne there and rule for a millennium?
Well, I don't think Jerusalem will be destroyed. I I think it obviously is the bone of contention. It is at this point in time the most important city in the world, but I don't believe it'll be destroyed. And of course, they talk about the millennium in the Bible, in the New Testament, and various places, and they also talk about a new heaven and a new earth. And as far as I'm concerned, when Jesus comes down to the earth, Battle of Armageddon, his second coming, he can do exactly what he wants to do, and I don't think he would give the people who are going to live on the earth during the millennium, I don't think he'd give them a burned-out hull,
No, that's what I think also.
Yeah.
So I believe that the destruction will be kept from happening there. Mm-hmm. And then I also wonder, whether, and of course I understand the Israelis are concerned that they're going to get blown up, but I'm thinking that probably there may not be anything that happens there. I don't know, or at least there may be something that takes place.
Well, the way I see the scenario, and this is just my take on it, I've read authors who have said that, it does say in Ezekiel 38 and 39 that this war would take place after Israel was experiencing a period of peace. Well, Israel has never experienced a period of peace in its existence for the last 63 years. So what I'm thinking is there are two areas, actually three if you count Daniel, but there are two areas in the prophets where they talk about a confederation of nations coming against Israel. One is in Psalm 83, and the other in Ezekiel 38 and 39. It seems to me that possibly Psalm 83 and the war that would commence there, which would be the first step of a third world war, that this would possibly give the Antichrist and the European Union, which I believe will be the revived Roman Empire, it would give them a chance to make peace in that area, and then the Russians would come again with along with Iran and and some of the other nations of North Africa, etc., Ethiopia, etc., to come against Israel again, and that apparently during that war it goes totally nuclear, and they talk about people's bodies, their eyes being consumed in their sockets, their flesh, burning off. Well, that describes a nuclear holocaust. And one thing that's strange is that the Israelis have according to what I've read in periodicals like Jane's and et cetera, the Israelis have spent a lot of time working with the idea of neutron bombs. Well, a neutron bomb does not destroy
the physical
buildings.
Yeah, right.
It kills all carbon life forms within a certain radius. And, I mean, they've got these things according to, what I say they have them. They believe that they have them. And there's speculation, that they have created quite a few of them. And in fact, there's been some talk that the American intelligence, especially the CIA, has encouraged the Israelis to put their resources into producing the neutron weapons. I really don't know for sure, but all I'm trying to say is that I believe that this is going to go nuclear, and you're going to see destruction. The world will see destruction like nothing. It will make World War II look like a skirmish.
Well, but that's what has to happen. And I'm not being pedantic about this because I know you understand Scripture.
You're right. You're exactly right.
But I mean, this has to happen in order for people to take on some entity that will promise peace.
Right.
They got to be that freaked out that they'll take anything, and that's when you get guess who.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, the United States, you're right. I mean, it's not mentioned. It's not going to be there. Yeah, you're up. That's the way it goes. I mean, that's exactly what happens.
Well, I mean, if you look at I'm not talking about, obviously you and I aren't involved in these kind of dealings, and the majority of the American public's not involved. Heck, the majority of the American public is, sitting around watching American Idol and don't don't have the slightest idea of what's going on in the world around them. But the American government and the American elites have been so involved in the last 60 some odd years since the end of World War II, in going into the rest of the world and jacking around with the government and politics of those places, and exploiting and even assassinating. I mean, I don't really have to give you the whole litany of all that, but I mean, this is it's going to come home to roost. I mean, chicken's coming home to roost on this thing, because we have become an empire. We were once a republic. We've become an empire. People still think that we have all this wonderful freedom, which we never really had in the first place. But at least we had a better deal here. Mm-hmm. Like you say, we had a better recess than the rest of them. It's I mean, we can't keep doing these things without it coming home to us.
Well,
and I don't think people realize what the government is doing and has been doing. And there's no way the people around the world are not going to forget this. But they're not going to let us get away with it forever. If they get strong enough, they're going to do something back, and it's just inevitable.